Good evening, everybody. My name is Kirsty, and I'm one of the librarians at Wyndham City Libraries. On behalf of Wyndham City Council, I'd like to recognise the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first custodians on the lands on which Australia was founded. Council acknowledges the Wathaurong, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the lands on which Wyndham City is being built. Council pays respect to the wisdom and diversity of past and present elders. We share commitment to nurturing future generations of elders in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Tonight, we are joined by interviewer extraordinaire Bruno Lettieri, who will be in conversation with award-winning author Alice Pung, whose newest novel, 100 Days, hits the shelves next week. I'll leave you now in their very capable hands.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hello, Alice.
Hi, Bruno.
You've got the kids all locked away in other rooms, have you?
Yes, I have. Yep, safely tucked away.
How do you manage that? You just must go from chaos into this, I need to be serene. How do you cross that bridge? So
I can see it.
What's that, sorry?
You just do it, Bruno.
You just
still hear them. I can still hear them from the other room.
They'll be bursting in at any moment.
Oh no, the door handle is too high for them to reach.
That's a very good technique. Alice, congratulations. Your launch is next week. This is a sneak preview. I've read all of 2 chapters of your book. So congratulations. And I've loved the 2 chapters. I'm not going to try and give a review because I haven't read all of it. And that's for people like Maxine Beneba-Clark to do a wonderful job. What's it like giving a sneak preview of a book that's barely kind of been unwrapped, that you've just kind of more recently laid your loving hands on it? Is there still an excitement about seeing this brand new artifact and going, this is kind of my creation?
There's still that excitement there, Bruno. But it's not entirely my creation. It's the designer who did the beautiful cover.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you all right. Can you hear me all right?
I can now. You were talking about the collaborative nature of the book, but the story, the guts of it is yours. I really get the kind of what the designer does and what the editor does. Was it hard to bring this new book about, given that you've just had a baby, 8 months ago? You've got 2 other kids, you live a very busy life, you work as well. Where did you find time to even write a letter to me, let alone a 300-page book?
Oh, it took 4 years, Bruno. So the book is called 100 Days because it's about a young, sorry, there was a message. So it's about a young 16-year-old girl who gets locked up for 100 days because she falls pregnant, and her very harassed.
I don't want to give too much away, and I want to get to that a little bit later if you don't mind, okay? Is that all right? Sorry.
But the thing is, we were locked down last year, so I've had people say, did you write this whole book last year because you were pregnant and you were locked down and it's about a teen? No, I didn't. It took me 4 years to write, and it was an uncanny coincidence that the fiction mirrored the truth of our situation. So I had the idea a long time ago, and it was probably a book I really needed to write. John Marsden says that he never writes a book if he has the answers to things. He doesn't think this great wisdom is handed down and, oh, look, I'm declaring it to the world. It's always because he has a question he's trying to get at the truth of. So
what's the driving question then in your book? What's the fundamental discussion you're having with the world, or the argument, as they say, that you're having with the world that fuels this narrative?
Oh, the argument that we're having. Oh, I like how you put it. That's very like that biblical story of Job, where everything went terrible for this good man and he has an argument with God, and all the wise priests come and say, why are you having this argument with God? It's God's will. The argument I'm having in this book, or the truth I'm trying to get at, is we think that love is the be all and end all. And we think that if we are controlling in a romantic relationship, that is an unhealthy relationship. And yet when we're controlling as parents, that's just being protective. That's just knowing what's best for your child. That's just part and parcel of having children. So I wanted to really interrogate this idea of at what stage does love, the control that you exert over a complete human being, at what stage does that love inadvertently tip into something closer to abuse? Yeah, so that was a question I was trying to.
Wow, that's a really big one. Alice, if I could be so cheeky as to say, as I said, I've only read 2 chapters because we wanted to make this a lovely build up to the big launch, which is next week, and it's been delayed a little bit, but nevertheless, it's still coming, and we didn't want to give too much away. And I had to stop myself from going into chapter 3 to stick to the rules of engagement. Imagine, Alice, that your book has already been claimed by a filmmaker, and he or she wants to make the film. Could you introduce us to the very opening scenes of your film in a kind of cinematic way? Could you give us the establishing shots and show us what the camera is looking at and who our protagonists are and what are they doing at this moment that your story kind of opens?
Oh, wow. What a question, Bruno. I'm not a filmmaker myself, so I don't have that cinematic eye. But I guess our opening shot would probably be of a 16-year-old girl in bed with her mother in an unusual situation. They both share a double bed, so they'd, and then the camera would pan away from the bed to what she stares at most of the day, which is the stippled cement on the ceiling that looks like a galaxy above. And then it would pan down 14 floors down outside the window, because she's 14 floors up, onto the cement that is also reflected from the moonlight. So the ceiling in her room looks similar, looks like a photo negative of the the asphalt on the floor 14 floors down. And that would probably give you some context as to where most of the book is set. It's there's a great writer, Murakami. When you read his books, you feel a overwhelming sense of claustrophobia, and that's afterwards you only realize that he's only set his book in institutions, in schools, hospitals, places like that. So there's a sense of claustrophobia because his book is set in a flat, a housing commission flat.
And did you deliberately set out to say, I want to mimic that sense of claustrophobia and I want to put it into this setting, because this is a kind of storytelling I've never done before, and I'm not even sure of what demands it's going to make on me and how I'm going to keep producing the momentum for the story given the confines.
Oh, yeah, because not much happens when you're locked up, and it's a real chamber because there's only at the most 5 main characters in this book. But it's not an experimental book, so you're not going to leave it feeling like there are things unresolved, it was too abstract to make sense, hopefully, sure. Because I start from a place of character, not from an idea or a political stand or anything like that. Yeah, so it's a character.
Starts from an idea is doomed to fail, isn't it, really? Because it's not going to, it's too hard to pull off, isn't it? Les Murray talks about starting poetry from an idea, and invariably they always die, he reckons. They've got to start from somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else for you? That scene that you've just kind of drawn for us, is that the opening scene in the genesis of your story, or does that come much later? Where's the beginning moment, the beginning what if, the beginning question? And when did it dawn on you that you had a novel that wanted to answer some questions?
Oh, I don't know, Bruno. I had a couple of threads that seemed not connected at all. Just, I was doing some mentoring with the social worker Les Twentyman's youth, his group of young people, and a young Sudanese girl came up to me after I gave a short talk, and she said, "I know, you know exactly how I feel. My mother doesn't trust me, so she locks me up. My brothers can go out loose, but I get locked up, and I have to wash the dishes and look after younger siblings. What's with that?" And it.
Got it. Sorry, Alice.
Oh no, I'm sorry, everyone. My computer completely restarted on me for some reason.
These things are sent to try me, I think.
Yes.
Listen, you were talking about the young Sudanese girl who you met
Oh
at
yeah.
Whitman talk. Pick the story up from there. She was saying that her mother doesn't trust her.
Oh yes, because she couldn't understand for the life of her why she hadn't done anything bad, and she was the oldest, of course, so she stayed at home, and her mother said, "Be a good girl, stay at home, and you know, look after your siblings and do the housework." But there wasn't the same rule for her brothers.
Yeah.
One of my best friends, who was brought up by a single mum, shared the same bed as her single mum up until she was 20. And so I realized there could be no secrets there. She couldn't hide anything. And I wanted to explore this idea of how far does love cross over into control. When I had my own child, my mother tried to enforce these rules of things I could and couldn't do based on her understanding of Chinese confinement practices, where you stay indoors for a whole month, you don't take showers, that kind of thing. So yeah.
So how did you escape that kind of tension, Alice?
Oh, it was a blessing in disguise. My first son, Leo, who's 6 now, was born premature, which meant that I got to go home from the hospital, and then I had to go back to the hospital every single day to visit him, which meant I had to leave the house. So already on day one, I broke the cardinal rule of confinement: never leave the house. And so there was, my mother couldn't enforce very much then, but she did the great things of confinement. She made all the foods that warm the blood, like the ginger chicken, and the foods that replenish your energy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wonderful. Alice, you start your book with a prologue, and you've got an epilogue, and you've got chapters. Tell me about the purpose of a prologue and why you started in this particular way. And of course, it starts with the lines, "Ever since your grandpa left, your grandma and I share the double bed. She says she can't sleep by herself, that it's too dark, even though the hallway light shines on the stippled cement dots on our ceiling. It's like an asphalt galaxy up there, like the road is above us instead of 14 floors below." What a perfect beginning. Do you know when you have the perfect beginning?
No.
No?
I don't have the perfect beginning initially. So the story starts from the character, and then you build, so you've got the bare bones of the character, and then you build the nerves and the organs around the character, and you don't know where the beginning is. But I knew the ending quite early on, actually. So it's a book that I knew the ending of.
Grab the snake wherever you can get it, and
yes,
then build which way. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
In that beautiful beginning, Alice, you used the word stippled that I'd never encountered before. Tell us about the rich galaxy of words that must be floating around inside the galaxy that is your mind, to be able to reach for that and go, that's the perfect word. And the second part to the question is, it's kind of telling us so much so quickly, isn't it? The compactness, the compressedness, so much detail already is there in those 4 or 5 lines. How does the storyteller learn that kind of compactness?
Oh, I don't know, Bruno, but one thing I did when I was younger, my father had a dictionary called the Longman's Dictionary of Contemporary English, which is the first dictionary he got. And this is embarrassing, but not quite. So I used to read that dictionary because I thought that if I knew all the words in the dictionary, I would know everything in the world, because the world was made of words. So every word that I knew was highlighted in different colored highlighters. And I started this project when I was about 13 or 14. I never quite finished it, but I never got out of the habit of learning new words. So when the internet was a big deal, back in the early 90s, there was this website which still exists called dictionary.com, which I encourage you all to log on, and they'll send you a word of the day. And sometimes some words are too perfect, so you remember them. And I guess that's where I get my words from.
And I guess, is there ever a fearfulness when you start a new book that here I go again, I'm laying myself open to deep questions that obviously are of fundamental importance to me because you're grappling with big things, that in come the people who are going to trawl their way through your book, who are going to shine their light on every bit of it like I'm doing now. Is that overwhelming, or is that exhilarating, or is it both of those? And why do you keep going? What's the fundamental kind of importance to doing that when most of us would run for cover?
Oh, well, Bruno, I've been lucky enough to really write each book for one particular person, not a real life person, but I have a particular one person in mind. And in this book was probably to a 16-year-old girl with adult responsibilities. It's a book with adult sensibilities. It's about pregnancy. It's about very adult topics. And I wrote it for this 16-year-old girl just because we have this paradoxical way of looking at young people. So at school, you force them to study Hamlet and Macbeth and Charles Dickens and all the great literature that covers love, loss, religion, sex, and death. And then we infantilize our kids if they're lucky enough to be in very safe suburbs, or we we give them responsibilities that they're not yet ready for. So that was the audience of my book. I don't think in general, what's the wider audience going to think? What is that lovely book club that I spoke to in that conservative suburb 4 years ago going to think? Will they read this book? I don't think about these things. And in fact, this book is not directed at a wider audience. It's a book written from a 16-year-old mother's perspective to her unborn child. Yeah. So it's not even.
Tell me about that choice of that narrator's voice, because as I said, she starts off going, ever since your grandpa left, and it's, referring to the grandparents of this unborn child, that, in the prologue. Why did you choose that kind of talking to narrative, and what does that allow you to do that other forms of kind of narration don't allow you to do?
I think it allowed me to get up close and personal, and also it gave me the freedom to be honest with this character. She's really pissed off with her mum. Her mum's her great oppressor in life, and her mum is called Grandma, M-A-R, great mistake. Yeah. So she's 16 years old. Everything is she's at loggerheads with this mother who controls every aspect of her life. And you see things entirely through the main character, Bruna's lens, and she's frustrated. And she is she's writing in this journal to her unborn child, like, I'll never be like your grandma. Your grandmother is so oppressive. She's doing everything wrong. And through the book, you can see things slightly shift, not entirely. No character undergoes a complete transformation, but something close to a sense of wisdom happens. Okay. And when you live so close to someone, sometimes it's really hard to develop empathy for the character that's oppressing you, but a sense of wisdom does develop. Hopefully the reader sees that as well.
I haven't got that far, so I haven't experienced that yet, Alison. Maxine Beneba Clark, who's your dear friend and who's going to launch the book for you, wrote in her glowing kind of tribute, Pung's characters are so real, I could feel them in the room. I can imagine, and I'm not a writer, Alice, that's almost the ultimate compliment, isn't it? To feel the characters in the room.
That was, yeah, such a lovely thing Maxine wrote, because she's a poet herself.
Sure.
And I know you buy the Saturday paper just to read her poems, because you've told me that's how good she is. A whole newspaper to read one poem.
Tell us about this paradox of being a fiction writer, but we create these extraordinary realities which are almost more real than our day-to-day existence. If I walk down the street, I'll say hello to Sandra, who sells me my Tassalotta ticket, and we'll have a lovely flip and we'll sledge each other. But I don't sit with him and, kind of investigate deeply his life. In a novel, we get that close investigation. The reality is very real, isn't it? Tell me how that's achieved.
Oh, for me, it's always achieved through character and emotionally rather than anything else. So some people write, and these are the books that kind of fall flat. They have a real issue, drugs, divorce, whatever that they want to explore. For me, that's not that interesting. Character always comes first, and these emotions that these characters feel. The most interesting emotions are the ones that are irrational, completely irrational, make no sense whatsoever. Of course, if your mother dies, you grieve. Of course, if your father yells at you, you feel angry. But I just remember, this is from real life actually, last year when I went for a walk after I had my baby Celeste. I went out for a walk and came back, and my mother was livid with me. She was so angry. She stopped talking to me for half a day. I'm like, what? I just went out to get fresh air. And she was so angry. And then I realized why. She called up my aunts and she said she went for a walk and she didn't even tell me, and the baby's too young. I can't control her anymore. I'm like, 40 years old. What's this deal with controlling? But I wasn't so chill, Bruno, because I was 40 years old and I was living at my parents' house because of COVID. And I felt 16 again. Yeah. And I felt irrationally angry. So I went on my phone and texted one of my good friends, Victoria, and said, my mum is so unreasonable. She's giving me the silent treatment because I went on a walk. It's these petty things, these really trigger-pulling amounts of pettiness in a family that really get to character and what I find fascinating to explore.
So Karuna, your main protagonist, who's the narrator, in part is a little bit of you too, Alice.
Oh, in part, a little bit of me and a little bit of friends I know and students I've met. So, amalgamation of a lot of people.
Absolutely. At the beginning of chapter 1, you say, they all think the things changed for me when I got knocked up, but they don't know that it started much earlier. And I loved it because it's not about an event that you then referred to. It's not about the knocked up. It's not the event which kind of, triggers this kind of whatever. But you go, it used to be, I thought one thing at a time, but that summer, the hottest we'd had in a while, my thoughts became scattered. Instead of marching in military formation through my mind, they dithered and loitered and looked in different windows. One is exquisite writing. Tell us about the different windows and tell us about why you decided to talk about this momentous thing happening in terms of the change of thinking.
Oh, just because that is how I felt adolescent happened to me and for a lot of people. As a child, inside your mind, you thought one thing at a time, and your desires were, you might have had many desires. Children have desires, but it was usually one thing. You need food, you want Pokemon cards, you're pretty clear in your desire, your intent, your emotions correlate to your desires often. And then suddenly something happens beyond your control. Suddenly these hormones affect the way you think. Suddenly you're no longer so sure of yourself. suddenly your mind wanders when you're 12, 13, you look out windows, you have strange feelings towards members of the opposite sex or same sex. It's a confusing time. You're a window loiterer instead of a straight line marcher now.
And in a sense, is the 40-year-old Alice still a loiterer and a ditherer? And is it the job of the novelist perhaps also to be continually looking through different windows in the way you describe of your 16-year-old character?
I think it is, Bruno, but I think the reality is I write differently now because I did the foolish and wonderful thing of having 3 kids in 5 years. So life is pretty busy. And it's so interesting. I had, I met up, I was invited to lunch with a bunch of other writer people, a very small group, and most of them were men. And they were talking about the time they had to write and what they were thinking. And I was, I had this baby with me and I had to pick up the kid from school. And I thought, well, I don't have the luxury of daydreaming in such a way anymore, except maybe late at night. So this book reflects a change even in the way I think from Lorinda, which looked in windows. I wrote it before I had my first son. Every single word in this book had to have its place. My sentences were shorter, but a poet friend once said to me, because I didn't understand poetry 10 years ago, I'm always an amateur at these things, even though poetry features a lot in 100 Days. He said, think about it. And he was an older gentleman who lectured in this. He said, think about poetry as a shelf. So each word is a single item on that display shelf, and you don't want an item on that shelf that shouldn't be there. And I thought that's exactly how I'll go about it, because I don't have much time to fill the shelf up with crap and then take the crap off, So I had to get it right. Yeah.
Is that voice, that advice of that writer, is that sitting on your shoulder nearly all the time, or it gets into you and then it becomes a kind of a natural selecting, a paring down kind of process that happens of itself?
Oh, I think it's both. I think when you're younger, especially when I was younger, especially in my teens, I spoke about using the dictionary before. I used the dictionary as a crutch to to support bad writing, which I thought if I use a dictionary and put in words, it will make me sound intelligent. All it was a bunch of feelingless adjectives, and I know this because I read students' works. The young people write like that. They try and sound like 40-year-old men or women. And now at the age of 40, I'm trying to pare everything back. So even though I have a much wider vocab, because thanks to the dictionary reading, I know exactly when to hold back on the words,
It's the whole less is more kind of philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
I reckon that applies to just general living. I was talking to my friend Susanna, and I happened to be in her car, and I said to her, less is more has become a really important principle to me as a 67-year-old. And she thought I was being flippant and poking fun at her because she taught, professional writing. I said, I hold back a lot more than I used to. I care about, as you said, only having a few pictures on the wall. I would have crammed the wall silly once upon a time. I think it's something that comes with maturity. Alice Pung, tell us about your main character, Karuna, and her mother. Describe both of them, paint pictures of them a little bit, and paint some of the interactions they have and the tension that's there in their relationship, please.
Okay, so Karuna's mother is Chinese from the Philippines. And the Philippines has a history, a very special history. In 1987, it was the only Asian country that had 2 beauty queens, 2 Miss Universes or 2 Miss Worlds. I can't remember what, it's in my book. And they have an obsession with beauty and basketball. And I completely understand that. And Karuna's mother, is Bruno's obviously doesn't play basketball because her mother doesn't think it's a ladylike thing, has this obsession with Karuna because that was the way one of the beauty queens, Margarita Mohan, said on national television, I think it was when she got crowned Miss World, she said, "That's great. Now I can buy a house for my family," which was something she could never do before. So Karuna's mother, who lives in a commission flat, thinks that her daughter is her ticket out to a far greater existence. And what's so interesting is the parents are separated. You know this quite early in the book. But Karuna's father isn't Filipino Chinese. He's white Australian. And so how she exists as a person that is both loved and loathed. Her mother will say, when they go to work, her mother will, and her Turkish friend will praise Karuna. Oh, look at her beautiful white skin. Look at her lion-colored eyes. Oh, too bad she's lazy like her dad. They're all lazy. So that's the tension that exists within Karuna.
And between Karuna's parents too, because as I said, Karuna goes into her father's workshop and she'll get under the car, and he has a different way with her, doesn't he? And he loves seeing her smeared with the grease of the workshop, and he doesn't care about those kinds of things. And there's a far more natural kind of relationship there, isn't there?
Yeah, at the beginning there's a great Karuna feels a great affection from her dad and a greater sense of acceptance, I think, because her mother's trying to mold her into something that she's not quite ready for. No child is ready for, pierced ears at the age of 6 or 7, that kind of thing. But from her mother's perspective, if her father had let her do it earlier, then there'd be no pain, because all children in the Philippines get their ears pierced before they're 1. That kind of logic, that kind of clash.
Absolutely. So tell us about Tweezer, who is a Greek girl who befriends Karuna at school in the early chapters. And I've got to reiterate that I don't know much beyond those early chapters. Well, I don't know anything beyond those early chapters. Tell us about how that friendship comes to be, and what's the dynamic there. And Tweezer loves coming into Karuna's house, doesn't she? She's fascinated by the mother and the salon and the applying of those very extravagant eyelashes and all of that. What's their relationship like?
Oh, so the mother, Karuna's mother, is she operates her own home business. So she's, finds a sense of purpose through that. She's turned the sunroom in their deer park home into kind of a beauty salon where she does makeup for brides, and she's very well sought after, because, and this is based on an auntie of mine who did this in the 80s. Today we have what's called eyelash extensions, where people glue individual eyelashes onto your own eyelashes. Well, my auntie was doing that back in the 80s. So she had customers queuing out, had to book her months and months in advance. That's what Karuna's mother does as her own independent small business. Tweezer, on the other hand, is called Tweezer because Karuna's mother can't pronounce her name properly. So Tweezer, like the seven tweezers, comes from a very religious Greek background. So her father would slap her silly if she so much as, smeared lipstick on her face. So she's fascinated by this life of Karuna's, and that's how they become friends.
And do they share that thing of the overprotective parents who are trying to mold them? Because, as I said, I don't know beyond those early chapters. Is that going to be an important theme going into the story?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Tell us about, you use Walt Whitman's quote at the start of the inscription. Can you remember the inscription?
Yes, I celebrate myself because something about every atom belonging to me as good as belongs to you. And I came, as I said many times to you personally, Bruno, I'm an amateur at poetry. I never studied it in any real sense, never studied at university, but I've always appreciated it because it's the distillation of words. And when I was younger, some of you know I grew up in Braybrook, I came to poetry quite organically. Sometimes the school would have a pile of free books, as in my book 100. So Karuna picks up a book from the free books pile, and it's she's given it. It's Walt Whitman. It's a tattered edition. She's like, I don't read poetry. What is this crap? But when you start reading Whitman, even if you're 13 years old, you understand him because his ideas are scattered, like the way your mind thinks, and they dive high, low into the ocean and high scramble up mountains. And I just thought this was very special when I discovered him as a younger person.
When did the decision to give a book a particular inscription come about, or is there a more kind of sacred relationship between that inscription and the transcendent kind of nature of the book, or am I looking?
Oh no, you're not. You haven't read that far, but yeah, Walt Whitman is the first book of tattered poetry that Karuna discovers.
Is there something mystical in that too? I celebrate myself and what I assume you shall assume, and every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you.
There is. There's something. It's written by a man, an old man with a big beard that he looks a little bit senile when you see pictures of him. But it could easily be a young mother talking about her child growing life in her. That Whitman is timeless and genderless, and that's what really resonated with me when I was younger and discovered his poetry. I didn't think of him as a man. I was shocked when I saw his picture.
And yet poetry sits in there at the beginning of big parts of your book. Her father's daughter, T.S. Eliot, don't you? And his beautiful meditations about love in the family. So I get this sense, Alice, that although you claim to be a novice, I think there's a very special relationship between you and poetry. What does, apart from the importance of every word, every item on that shelf, to use the analogy you used before, what is it that poetry can do that the prose can't? And do you go to it when you're in states of shock or sadness, or when the world overwhelms you, or when the world is looking for a way of bringing you back?
Well, I inadvertently go to it because you send me poems during very important moments, weddings, funerals, birth of children, that kind of thing. I remember you sent me Sylvia Plath's Love is Like a Fat Wide Watch when I had my first son. And they're things that stay with me, Bruno. And a beautiful poem you wrote when there was a bereavement in the family. It stays with me when it's a gift, I think. To be honest, no, I don't go seeking poetry when big things happen. I just let them happen.
I'm taking a bit of a punt here, Alice, but I sense two things. I sensed in some of the conversations we had, as we walked around the park, that this book was different for you, and I know you've touched on that already. And I think you were saying that maybe you were doing something that you maybe hadn't tried before. And I also think about the fact that you've given a poem for a little website I run too. And I got the feeling that maybe you were taking your first, not baby steps, but your first tentative, shy steps into the realm of poetry. Is that important to you as a 40-year-old now, to be trying new things in your prose and trying to enter a world of poetry and seeing what you might be able to do there?
I don't know, Bruno. I appreciate poetry. I wouldn't call myself a poet, no.
But you liked having a go, is my sense.
Yeah, it's fun to have a go, and thank you for giving me that platform to do it.
Are we preoccupied in our literary Western world of going, there's poetry, there's journalism, there's fiction, there's non-fiction, there's that. I get the feeling some other cultures, they're not as anxious about the categories, but what it is that we're trying to say and the way we're trying to say. Do you have a view on where we are in terms of our fascination? And can I be a memoirist and a novelist and a poet and journalist? Because I think you sit comfortably in all of those kinds of realms, Alice.
Oh, thank you, Bruno. That's a lovely thing to say. I think we have very, our boundaries could be less rigid. You know, some cultures, poetry is storytelling and vice versa. That's the only way you tell a story. And in fact, in many children's books, they're done completely by verse. The other thing that I find interesting is we like to cleave in half this distinction between young adult books and books entirely for adults. I don't know why we do that. I'm not sure if it's a marketing thing. Yeah. I don't blame marketing people because, you know, they try and sell your book as best as they can. But sometimes I don't think there is that distinction. Yeah. I've met very mature 14-year-olds who have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and I've met very carefree 50-year-olds who have had quite innocent lives, and you can tell by the look in their eyes. So I don't see that distinction at all. One of the loveliest things. Sorry, here you go.
Publishing world, Alice, for you?
Sorry?
Maybe people want to kind of say, Alice, you belong in the young adults, and here you are popping, you know, into this 100 days, which is obviously, you know, as you say, directed to this young person, but it sits very comfortably, doesn't it, as an adult?
Yeah, I don't mind where I'm popped. You know, it's lovely to be read by both adults and young adults as well, and to have this book be considered as a serious adult fiction. But my editor of 20 years wrote me a very short, he's a man of few words, but he said, well done, you've written a Bildungsroman, which is a word that I learnt means a coming of age book, for a person for whom Bildungsromans are usually not written. You know, coming of age books aren't written for pregnant teenage girls unless they're didactic books about don't get pregnant or you know, things like Juno, which no pregnant teenager has all these wisecracking things all the time. You know what I mean? So that was a big compliment. But I'm really pleased now. I don't mind if I'm adult or young adult. I'm really pleased that I'm just not that Asian Australian writer who writes stories about Asians, because I was worried for a while that might be the case. But the way this book's been marketed and the way it's been received has been wonderful. It's a humanist reception rather than a political one or, you know, a pigeonholing one.
Do you hold your breath as I asked at the very start? You go, what will they make of it? At some level, we are all kind of frightened of having our performance or our art or whatever we do analysed. I mean, if someone walked in and sat at the back of my classroom and then came out and gave me a review, I would be gulping. Do you still gulp, or is there something about being 40 and having 3 kids and going, I've lived enough now. I kind of know myself pretty well. I don't worry about it.
Oh, to be honest, it gets easier each time, and you have more distractions the more kids you have, you know. Yep. So I think, oh, well, if this book doesn't do too well, I've done pretty well. I've had 3 kids and they're quite happy and they're healthy. But there is a bit of a gulp just because this book was written and published right after our lockdown, and a significant part of it is set in a housing commission flat 14 floors up, and a significant part of it is about a girl who's locked up, has no freedom whatsoever. So I was worried that, you know, people would look at it and think, oh, she wrote a coronavirus book. But of course I could not have written that book in 1 year. I'm not that talented. Yeah, and I don't write books about topical things, which is why my last 2 books were set in the past, you know, 20 years ago, and what was it, almost 40 years ago.
Maxine Beneba Clark, again, in her praise of you, says, this is truly fiction at its fiercest. I like thinking you as being fierce. Is that the fierceness that any writer has to have in terms of holding the lens up to the world so so unmovingly, so unwaveringly, so without kind of trying to, fudge it? Is that the fierceness that's required in writing, or is what's fierce?
Oh, only Maxine can use that word because that's a Beyonce word. The rest of us using that word just sound like tryhards, don't we?
But she
So
wouldn't.
what
That's silly, and it's big praise, isn't it?
it is, it's a wonderful word. You're right. It is what's so interesting is what's something that the wonderful writer Christos Theolkis does. So if anyone who's had the honor of meeting him in real life or the pleasure of talking to him, you'll find he's a very jovial, very cheerful, very gentle and kind man. But when you read his books, especially the last one, Damascus, which is set after the death of Jesus, lions are killing Christians, people are getting eviscerated. It's brutal and it's ugly and it's visceral and it's compassionate too. You find that I think, oh, I get you, Christos. You exercise all your demons through your writing, and that's allowed you to be such a such a funny, mellow, wonderful, pleasant human being. And you don't inflict your rage upon the world. You
So
inflict it
you're
on the page.
exorcising too, are you?
Sorry.
You're exorcising too,
I
like
guess
stuff?
so. Yeah.
Victor Slavosky wrote, Alice, that art exists that one might recover the sensations of life. It exists to make one feel things, to make the stone stony. We need that, don't we? We need poetry and novels to shake us up, to throw us into the unknown, to get us being not complacent, to get us understanding the predicament of others. It's a big deal, isn't it? Do you feel like you fit into Victor's definition, that you're hoping people might recover some of their sensations of living, that they might live a little bit more truthfully, more audaciously, more bravely?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't tell people how to live, and I don't hope to do
No,
so in my book.
you'd
But
be the
you
last
remind me
person.
of something quite wonderful Arnold Zabel said. He was talking about the men and women with whom he grew up, the older men and women who came out of those horrible concentration camps. And he said that they came out with a feral vitality. And I thought, what perfect words to describe this urgency to live and to be alive and to suck in the world. And that was when I decided that words could do something quite special. He was the first writer I ever met in real life. He came to our school when I was 16, the same age as my narrator. So, yeah.
And is that what you want for your kids, to have a feral vitality?
I do. And, I wish my kids would love books as much as I do, but I don't mind if they don't, because there's other ways to have that feral vitality.
Yeah.
Football,
And your mother has it, doesn't she?
Sorry?
Your mother has it, doesn't she? And she's never
Oh, she
talking about.
definitely does. She's like what they call a lioness mother. She's fierce. She's Maxine's definition of fierce, and I hope that this book honors her in some way. You see it entirely through the 16-year-old's perspective, and 16-year-olds are selfish and they're disgruntled. But when you see the the double shifts the mother does, the extreme tension she's under, you understand a little bit of why she behaves the way she does.
I'm going to take that phrase to my death, feral vitality. And here's another woman of feral vitality who's trying to get into the script. Kirsty, thank you for the opportunity. You have a few questions? Do you have a bit of feral vitality, Kirsty?
Sorry?
Do you have a bit of feral vitality?
Oh, I'd like to think so. Thank you. Everyone seems to have been really enthralled with your discussion so far. So we've only had one question, but it's a really good one. So this is from Tom, who seems to have been lucky enough to get a hold of an advanced review copy of 100 Days, and says she loved it, and she's really hoping it gets, I'm assuming, I'm sorry, Tam really hopes it gets a Stellar Prize nomination. and is currently reading Lorinda, and those the protagonists are both teenage high school girls. Their interactions with the world are so vastly different, and Tam loves them both in different ways. So Tam wants to know, what is it about girls of that age that are interesting to you as a writer?
That's a great question. I think at that age, I'm quite interested in the intellectual and emotional life of girls that age, where we treat girls more like women from a very young age, and boys can be boys, as that expression goes, and sometimes they're men and they can be boys, you know, as recent events show, and they're excused for their misdemeanors. But girls have to be women at a very young age, sometimes at 14, sometimes 15 or 16. And so I'm fascinated by the way we infantilize girls. Oh, you have to be protected at all costs, as my characters are in both Lorinda and this new book, 100 Days, but also the fierce sort of independence, the intellectual independence that both young women have in my books. Their thoughts are entirely their own. And if you've read the book, so you'll know that even though she's trapped 14 floors up, completely locked in with a newborn baby, she finds ingenious ways to keep that baby safe, and to attain a sort of economic independence, you know, to earn a living, 14 stories up, completely isolated. And I don't think that's unrealistic. I don't think that is an unachievable feat for a young girl. Greta, you know, the young girl who did the climate change action, but also on a smaller scale, I just remember getting my first thing published when I was 14. It was a picture of Michael Jackson, because I was a huge fan, in a small magazine called Video Hits. And I remember getting $30 Brash's gift voucher to get a CD. And I thought, oh man, I've just won the lottery. So you can achieve victories in small and large ways, despite your circumstances. So I really admire the resilience of teenage girls.
Thank you.
You coming back, Kirsty, or?
Sorry, I thought you were about to speak, so
No, I thought that was the signal to wind it all up. Is that right?
Yeah, you can chat for a little while longer if you want. I don't think anyone would mind.
Okay, Alice, we're going to lighten this up a lot. Okay, Alice, what's his name? John Marsden's book was called Everything I Know About Writing. I want one line, and I mean one line, responses to all of these things.
Okay.
Alice Pung telling us everything she knows about writing. Beginnings. Give us your advice on beginnings.
Just do it.
Voice.
Keep it real.
Dialogue.
Don't be afraid to use slang or swear words.
Plot.
I don't know. I'm not Matthew Riley, so not so important if you're writing character-based books.
Tell us a bit more about the character base, because there's that discussion, isn't it? You know, character is plot, I've heard say many times too. If the character is right, if the character is real, if the character is lifting off the page and has a vitality and a fierce vitality of her own, you're halfway there.
You're halfway there. The plot shapes itself sometimes. You're guided by your characters.
Yeah, okay. Denouement.
Oh, sorry, Bruno. That's one word I didn't highlight in my dictionary. What does it mean?
Don't they talk about that in the story arc, and the denouement is the phase? Yeah.
A couple of attempts. That's my one-word answer.
Fantastic. at what point do you say this book is finished? There is nothing more I want to do. It is time for it to go sauntering off into the world, and there's no need for me to go beside it and commentate on it like we're doing now. Do you know when? Do you know?
I do. I do. When it's pried from my cold dead hands from a wise editor.
Really?
Yeah.
If the editor didn't do that, you'd be clutching back and
Keep
going,
tinkering away, I think.
let
Yeah.
me share another line. Let me look. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you look back on this book, when you're 60, Alice, will you go, that's held up pretty well? Or will you do what a lot of us do to any of our previous work and just see monumental flaws in and go, oh, did I really say that? Did I really think that? Did I really write like that?
Oh, to be honest, Bruno, I haven't read my previous books. You know, besides when before you're about to launch it and when you have to do all the publicity,
Yeah.
or when I'm talking to students about things. But no, I haven't looked at Unpolished Gem for 10 years and Her Father's Daughter for 7. I have new stuff to make. So.
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely, I get that. And going into schools and meeting your readership and meeting the very kinds of girls who are going to face predicaments like Karuna, how much does that keep fueling your desire to be a storyteller? Because that is your audience. They are the people who are reading your book, and they have their questions and they have their things that they think, and they're telling you that the book has done this or done that. That must be a stunning kind of experience, Alice.
Oh, it is stunning. But you know what, Bruno, what's even more powerful and stunning is sometimes there'll be one or two young women of every generation who they write to me, and then we become friends, and then they get published and they become authors themselves. Like, I think my friend Shu Ling Chua is a stunning example of that, who's here today. And you think, oh, this is a different voice. This is a voice that I could never do in a million years because I don't have that courage. And so one of the most beautiful things with this book, Bruno, is when my first book came out 15 years ago, I had mostly interviewers who were Anglo-Australian, quite a bit older, asked me a lot of cultural questions because it was pertinent at that time. And I think now, 80% of my interviews have been with young Asian Australian women or Indian Australian women, Pakistani women who get the essence of the book. Yeah. And so I don't get that many cultural questions. We just delve right into the heartbeat. And I think, wow, what a change it's been over 15 years. What a wonderful thing to have new voices out there.
And do you see yourself as being a pioneer in that field?
No,
no, you don't take
I'm not a pioneer. I'm a lot of credit. I feel like a dinosaur, actually.
At the age of 40, it's a very
and when I was even 25, I couldn't write sex scenes, and I still don't, because it takes a rare gift to do them well. So these younger writers are brilliant, with the nuance, with the level of detail. Yeah, just things that I don't dare not venture into. They plow straight in.
Helen Garner says that a writer can't, like a singer or songwriter, keep playing their repertoire of songs. You've got to pull something out of thin air each time.
Oh, yeah, you do, yes.
Does that drive you bananas, having to do that, or are you at peace with the thought that you've got to keep doing the pulling?
Oh, no, I'm excited by that thought, Bruno. I don't have to. I'm so glad no one's ever said, oh, please write a sequel because Lorinda did so well, or, with the exception of Unpolished Gem, which did unexpectedly well as a first book, and they were all wanting me to write a second one soon before I lost momentum. I've had the wonderful grace of my publishers letting me take as long as I want, giving me 4 years to do this book, no deadline whatsoever, because they know you can't hurry something that's quite different from the last thing.
And in Saturday's Age, Alice, you you were interviewed by Benjamin Law, weren't you? And it was called Dicey Topics, and you had to talk about death, religion, and sex. And
Oh,
and I actually thought I'd like to run that part of the newspaper. And of course, I wouldn't have asked you about death, sex, and religion. I would have asked you about gumption, tenderness, and eros. But I'm going to keep that for another time. So we might do that, and I might push Benjamin Law off that page.
oh, you might. But you know what, Bruno? It's called Dicey Topics because he rolls a dice.
I know.
He really does roll a dice.
I know. But I like the notion of that a lot. Alice, of all the writers I know, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm some kind of literary kind of person at all, because I kind of feel like I'm a reader who's accidentally strolled into this world and been given the lovely privilege. But I think you are the most down to earth of all the writers I know.
Oh, I don't
And I think you are the least self-absorbed of all the writers I know. And your first question is always out to the other person. And I think I kind of see you fidget when people at Kick to Kick want to ask you questions about your writing. And I get this feeling of, I'm just here playing with my kids, and I'm a mum and I just want to go and get a gelato. And, you know, I don't think you make a big deal of it, which is, yeah, great, your humility and your great strength too. So it's been a pleasure talking to you again, Alice, and this is the last interview I'm ever going to do. So
That's not true, Bruno.
I have to be dramatic. Okay, it's been a great pleasure, and I'd like to hand you back to Kirsty, and I'd like to thank Wyndham Libraries for putting this on, and I've become a great friend of librarians because they give me a lot of work, and I love strolling into libraries, and I feel very much at home there too. So Kirsty, and to Timothy, who's doing the buttons there in the background, thanks a lot. Libraries do in fact change lives. So thank you, Alice Pung. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank
Before I
you.
go, I have to show everyone I have a special Bruno Goes Everywhere t-shirt. I'm a great fan of Bruno.
I didn't put it up to that. Thanks, Alice Pung. Thanks,
Thank you,
Kirsty.
Bruno.
Thanks, Wyndham.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you so much, Bruno and Alice. It's been a brilliant talk, and thanks everyone for attending. 100 Days comes out on the 1st of June, so not very far away. So you can pre-order that, or if we're not in lockdown, you can stroll into the bookstore and pick that up, or you can pop it on hold. We've ordered a couple of copies at the library as well. So thank you so much again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.